Welcome to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schumann. There are no shortages of conversations these days about talent, but many of those involve workers at that middle skills level. Certainly an ongoing challenge, but not the only one. One way to help better attract and retain workers is to have great leaders and highly functioning teams, and that'll be the focus of our discussion today. With us in studio is Fort Wayne-based CEO of a human capital consulting firm, Emily Bermes. Welcome to the In Chamber.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Emily, I mentioned CEO of a human capital firm. I'm going to go out probably not too far on a limb and say that your phone number, your email address, your website have probably been pretty popular the last few years. Am I on target there?
Yeah, actually, we've doubled it just in the last 2.5 years. We've actually doubled in size. So I think, part of that may be branding, but I think a lot of that also is the attention that's being given to leadership and culture and retention of top talent. And to your point, great leadership, strong cultures are the key to that. And, we're in an economy, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never seen a more competitive labor market ever. And so organizations, I think, are left without a choice than to focus on these things so that they can, attract and retain that top talent.
Yeah, it's maybe they're acting a little bit out of desperation. Maybe we wish we would have seen it sooner, but it's good that they're acting and doing what they can at this point, at least.
Absolutely.
Emily, you mentioned you've been doing this for about 20 years. Do give the listeners a little bit of your background, what you did prior to this, and kind of how about that transition from your prior work into the consulting and coaching field.
Sure. So I started off actually in higher ed. I ran a large program for Purdue, and also was a researcher during that time. And what I found was that I was a very good researcher, but I hated it because you do all this work and you get something published and your own mom isn't going to read it because it's so boring, right? And so you never get the satisfaction of thinking that the work that you've done has actually helped someone. And so I started dabbling in consulting during those years. And what I found was in consulting, I can see and touch and hear and feel the impact of our work every single day. Every single conversation makes a difference. And so the connection between, I love to solve problems. That's what researchers do. But in consulting, you actually get to create the solution and see the result, which to me was much more satisfying emotionally. So the longer I was in consulting, the more I, sort of thought this is really actually a better fit for me. So when the economy tanked last time, I decided let's go out on your own full time and see if you can swing it, which was bad timing. But
how about that research background, though? How does that still help you today? Just, again, some of the mechanics, some of the things you learned from that, and how do you apply it to the work you do now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it actually has been extremely helpful, and I'm very glad that I took that focus in grad school because everything we do is evidence-based. So if I'm working with one single individual and we're supposed to be developing them for promotion, you have to know the right questions and who to ask the questions of to do a thoughtful assessment of where they're performing currently, and then do that gap analysis to see, what would need to change for that person for them to be ready for the next role or to be optimal in this role. So it really, that's all research skills. And then when you're interviewing people, what are the right questions to ask, and how can you tell if you're getting resistance or the right answer? How can you tell if this person's trying to throw this guy under the bus? How can you tell if this guy is trying to make him or her sound better than he or she is? So I think those skills, that I use them every day, and I think it gives our firm. I think it gives us a legitimacy because everything we do is evidence-based, and we use some qualitative methods and some qualitative methods, but I think because our methods seem to make sense to people, I think we quickly win over like the CFOs, right, or the CIOs, because HR can feel a little squishy to those folks. And so when we really put solid metrics behind every action that we're taking and then follow-up metrics to sort of demonstrate what's the result here, that speaks to some of the people that our kind of work wouldn't normally be a natural affinity to. So I think it's been extremely helpful, and it's a huge differentiator for us.
Give a little overview then of the firm today. Again, we talked about coaching, consulting, working with teams. It's just some of those areas that you specialize in, some of the clients, the clientele that you work with.
Certainly. So I'll start with clientele. Our clientele is really unique because there's so much diversity among the groups that we work with. So we work with some big Fortune 500 companies like Tyson and Discover Card, Eli Lilly, and then we've got these teeny tiny little companies that you would have never heard of, like a Fort Wayne Metals Research Corp. What's funny, they're a small company.
Well, we talked about them before the interview when we were on the phone, okay. and we just happen to have done a lot here with them at the chamber, and then they've been very involved with us. But yeah, great organization.
Great organization, and if you've got any metal in your body, it probably came from them. So people don't always know that brand, but they do really amazing work. And then we do everything in between. So what's really interesting, I think, about this line of work is that, while the people side we're experts in, every new sector you enter, it's like, okay, a different way of making money, different economic pressures, different, sort of cultures. So that part's really interesting. So our client base is very diverse, and that's what keeps it fun. In terms of the practice lanes themselves, our largest practice lane is actually our newest practice, and it's executive onboarding. So we had a client, and they were in the banking industry, and what they found was that when they hired people at the officer level, they often didn't stay, or they often didn't fit in well enough to really create the results they were hoping that person could create. And they just asked if that was a problem that was solvable, and my answer was, I don't know.
We'll figure it out. We'll see.
Right? I'll try. So we developed an onboarding process for officers that's very simple, actually. And we piloted it, and then we scaled it to test, and now it's a full program. Any officer that comes into that organization goes through this program, and it's really just as simple as assessing people's expectations for that person, because often the job descriptions come from HR and the boss, but there are multiple stakeholders. They're going to have to be working interdependently, cross-functionally, and all those voices really need to be heard for that executive to quickly understand what the expectations are in a way that will broadly meet expectations versus just matching the boss's expectations. There's also a coaching component that goes with that program, because when leaders come into new organizations, they're often anxious. They're always afraid of failing. Most of them are afraid of failing. They may have moved their family across country, put their kids in new schools, so the pressure's quite high. And what we know clinically is that when people are stressed or afraid, they don't do their best thinking. They stop thinking critically, they stop thinking creatively, and they really start reacting out of fear. So we help them stay in touch with their best thinking through that first 6 months. We do some work with their team to help their team align with the new expectations of that new leader. And so it's very simple, but to date we've done, I think that the typical fail rate at that level of an organization is 40 to 50%, and at least across the client base that we serve. And to date we're working on our 60th right now, but of the 50 that are complete, we've only had one person that didn't fail to be successful in her role.
Yeah, I read in a blog post of yours that statistic that said up to 50% of first-time CEOs don't succeed in that role. So two questions, and you kind of touched on a little bit. One, first, is why is that the case? And second, I'm sure there's a lot of elements in that, but again, what's that number one thing that you and your organization do to try to make sure that CEO is on the right side of that 50% equation successful?
Mm-hmm. I think the most common reason, and this would be CEO down through first level VP, and the dynamics aren't dramatically different as you look at those populations. I'd say the first most common reason that executives fail in those roles is that they don't read the culture correctly. So if I grew up in GE, right, and I was very promotable in GE, and I go into an organization that might have a much different culture, and I start acting like a GE leader, and say I go to Fort Wayne Metals, if you had that more kind of aggressive leadership style, and you go into an organization like a Fort Wayne Metals that has a more collegial, collaborative climate, you'll be a bull in a china shop, and very quickly people will alienate you socially. And unfortunately, if people alienate you socially because you just don't feel like one of us, then you're going to have a really hard time getting people on your business agenda and to really be helping push your business agenda. So what I call it organ rejection. So you're in the seat, you're in the role, you're not fitting in, you're not winning people over, they're not supporting your business agenda, therefore your business agenda is going to stall and flail. So a couple things may happen. You're going to get fired because you're not creating the business result you were hired for. Or you may see the writing on the wall and realize, I'm never going to be able to do what I want to do here. These people don't get it, right? So
and
then
those
you're going to have to
things can happen
select
kind
out.
of quickly?
Quickly.
Yeah.
Within the first 18 months, that typically is what happens. And so, the cost for that organization then is it's 2x whatever that executive is making, and obviously these salaries are all over the place, but they're all pretty expensive brains, right? So if you spend all that money on a person making $750 a year, it's double that to recover from the business loss, to then start recruiting to hire again, and then the lag time until this next person hopefully gets to that business result. So you waste time, you waste money, you create chaos in the organization. You've got too much turnover for teams that are going to grow quite frustrated. In fact, the first gentleman that I assimilated with this approach, his team was so demoralized. They had 5. It was a complete turnaround. Was the charter? It was a mess, and he had 4 predecessors in 2 years. So his poor team are like...
So each one of those creates more skepticism, more doubt among the teams, I'm sure.
Yeah. And so his team was saying things like, look, I get it. He's a hot shot. We're not ready to get behind one more hot shots. Big ideas, they never work. So, these are all real costs to the organization. So leaders need to come in a way that is culturally acceptable. They have to be very clear on what the charter from multiple perspectives is, and then they've got to win over the hearts and minds of the people that they need to lead. They've got to demoralize team. They got to get the morale up, all those things, and it's a delicate balance of all those competing tensions, competing priorities. It's tricky to get it right.
Let's talk about teams for a little bit, because I know you do a lot of work in that area. Let's say an executive team, a senior management team. I'll give you a choice here. What's more common? A team that's been together for a long time and maybe not really challenging each other. They've almost become too comfortable with each other. Or is it an ambitious group that maybe not just doesn't work well together, or isn't managed well from the top? Are they both common problems, or one more so than the other?
Yeah, it depends on how long that team has been together. I mean, you certainly see some that have worked together for so long they're almost like family, and they can get complacent in their roles. They can get complacent around, well, she's the one that always ultimately makes the decision, and I'm the one that takes notes, and they just can get too comfortable in their role. So sometimes it's coming in and shaking up a little bit around behaviors you want to see from everyone on the team, shake up the role structure a little bit so that they don't fall into that groupthink mentality. So they often need an infuse of, ways to be more creative together, ways to be more courageous with one another, so that they can continue to harvest the best of what's within them, but not in the same old way.
Do teams recognize that and come to you with that challenge, or is that something you might observe and have to bring to them?
Mm-hmm. If they're that comfortable, there's usually another reason that they want me to come in and shake things up. It might be that they think, their employee engagement isn't quite where they want it. So that's not usually the presenting symptom, right? That just may be what I find when I get there. And so they'll say, why aren't these people? And I come in and start assessing things, and it's like, well, it's actually you guys. So I would say, though, for newer teams, like I have a client right now where they have an ownership structure, and they're selling the business to a second generation ownership structure, and they're being very proactive about making sure that this next generation of owners thoughtfully come together in a strategic way as a team, that their roles are clarified. So teams like that tend to struggle with, our roles aren't clear enough, our decision rights aren't clear enough, our governance isn't clear enough, who's stepping on whose toes and how and why, what do good handoffs look like, how do we build trust among each other. So they need different things, and I think more often organizations are cognizant that that's a need.
Emily, you also write about something called healthy conflict. A lot of us probably hear the word conflict, you have those negative perceptions, the concerns about it. Talk about a healthy conflict and what executives do to turn that around, make it a healthy, a growing situation.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, no one likes conflict, let's be honest. And what's interesting is when you really dig into it with individuals, their feelings about conflict often stem from home, from where they grew up, right? So if you grew up in a bombastic household where yelling and screaming and punching walls was the norm, when conflict comes up, they literally feel like, uh-oh, here it comes. So they expect that kind of behavior as an adult. Is very interesting. So what I see with conflict, healthy conflict to me is the ability to disagree, to share facts, to share different points of view in a way that doesn't harm the person that you're talking to, right? And I don't see, and obviously culture varies. I mean, I have heard examples of organizations where people are perfectly happy to throw a chair to make a point. I don't typically work with those clients. I haven't personally seen it, but I've heard about it. And that might seem normal in those environments. It's not a place I'd like to work personally. What I see more often is in organizations that are too polite, where they're so afraid of hurting someone or being rude or being perceived as aggressive that they bite their tongue, they pull their punches, and when something needs to be stated quite strongly, they hold back. Or worse, so they don't say what needs to be said, so they're robbing everyone in the room of a piece of information that could be critically important. And, or even worse, they'll agree in the meeting and say, yes, I agree, and then they'll go to the bathroom and have a conversation, with the guy next door, and then they'll say, I didn't really buy that, I'm not on board for this. So they'll say one thing in the room with everyone there, and then they'll privately, either undermine what was decided or on the side get other people to not go along with what was decided. It's quite childish, but amazingly common.
And you say then the key for the boss, the CEO, whoever in charge, is to hopefully have that environment that invites people to be open, to share, and if he is seeing this conflict, welcoming it and making sure it's dealt with well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And there's a couple ways they can do that. I mean, I think first of all, the whoever has the most power in the room should be the last to speak on any topic, because you really want to be the person that's evoking, information from others through questions and asking. Often too, it can be very helpful for groups if the person with the most power is asking the more introverted, quiet people, like, I can see you thinking, what are you thinking of this, right? Because your best thinkers are usually your quieter people, your introverts, and so really asking people to participate and then speaking last.
Emily, I also listened to a podcast you did with our friends at the IU Kelley School of Business, and I'll tell you one thing that just really jumped out from that. You noted that a woman might have 4 of the 5 qualifications for a certain job or promotion, but won't apply if they lack just that in that one area. On the other hand, a man might meet one of the qualifications, apply, and be upset that they didn't get the position or the promotion. Talk about that a little bit, and is it changing at all? Is it evolving a little bit, or is that still kind of the case?
It's still the case. It's one of the reasons that I think, the best male leaders do a really good job of providing sponsorship for more junior females. I think women tend to think that if I get a female mentor that she's gonna, push me and help me with my career. And that can be completely true. I'm not taking any away from those relationships. But because men tend to think they're more risky when it comes to taking new roles, so I think sometimes they do a better job of pushing younger females to say, she might be stuck in self-doubt. And these are confident females. It's not like, they're all like, oh, I can't do it. It's just, and I don't know what drives this difference, right? Is it how we're raised? Is it, the leaders that we see don't look like us? I don't know what's driving this tendency, but it can really help if you've got an older male advocate who can say, look, I saw this role. I can see you in this role. Because if the female, and I've had this experience where my first administrative role, my boss was like, I want you in this role. And I was like, in a million years, I would never apply for that role. He said, well, you're going to take the role. This is how it's going to go. And I was like, you're nuts. But I think that's one powerful thing that men can do for females in the workplace, is to really find the ones that you can get behind, that you can advocate for, and then really be pushing them to take more risks with their careers. Because if females in their own minds, if we're all mostly that way, we're not going to push each other quite the same way that a male will come along and say, you've got to be kidding me, take the role, kid. At least go for it.
Yeah, because we hear that perception so often. Maybe some of the things holding some women back is not seeing other women in those positions. But again, you're talking about the importance of a male in this case, helping a younger female along and guiding that path. It doesn't have to be female at all.
Mm-mm. Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's the women that are holding themselves back, and if it's self-doubt or they don't see a role model in that position. Again, I don't know what's driving this, but the stats have been holding true for quite a long time, and what I see in practical situations in workplaces is that, if females can find a male advocate, it can be helpful to get her to a more powerful position, both because he invites her into the powerful space, and because he's going to push her and go, I don't care if you're scared, apply for that job.
Emily, we talked a couple of weeks ago before sitting down for this conversation, and you mentioned you're a shy, timid person. You're soft-spoken. And most people that know me, and I'm afraid Tony's going to laugh here, I'm actually a shy person too. Seriously, in a social setting, I'm uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. I'll stand in the corner and kind of wait and look at my watch and wait for it to be over. If it's a conversation like this, or I'm interviewing someone for the magazine, I'm very comfortable because I feel like I'm in control of the situation. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about from your perspective. You're in the position of guiding people, helping solve challenges. How do you overcome being shy, or maybe not having that natural inclination to speak out? How do you overcome that to do the work that you do?
That's a great question. Determination. So, if you think about, my theory on life, for what it's worth, is if there's anything that I'm afraid of, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it until I'm not afraid of it anymore. So when I think about things that I do in my career now, it would take an awful lot to make me uncomfortable, right? But 20 years ago, I'd be afraid to go, when I was learning about what networking meant and whatever. So I'd go to maybe an art gallery. Would there be people at art galleries that would have business connections? Because I came from a university, I didn't have any business connections. And it took so much encouragement for me to just go put myself out there like that. And so I would just make myself uncomfortable, and then more uncomfortable and more uncomfortable, and then start going after bigger and bigger corporations and being, quite successful in them. And so for me, it's discipline. I'm stubborn. I'm very German. I'm stubborn. I'm disciplined. And I refuse to let that uncomfortableness keep me from being as successful as I want to be, and from doing the work and touching the lives of the people that I want to. 20 years makes a big difference. I'm still not like a huge fan of public speaking, even though I do quite a lot of it, but I can do it now, and sometimes my knees don't even shake. So it's,
what a
it's
great
a discipline.
What a great outlook. What a great approach, though, to take, to say, overcome whatever uncomfortable feelings you have because you want to eventually succeed.
Yeah.
That's
and then
awesome.
Things stop being uncomfortable,
Yeah.
So it works. It's not fun. It's kind of stressful, but it works.
Well, hopefully this isn't too stressful.
No, this is fine.
All right.
It's just you guys.
So, just the two of us here, and those few people out there listening. Many people, hopefully. So, Emily, we run a Best Places to Work in Indiana program here at the Chamber, honors outstanding workplace cultures. And one of the things each year, the results from that kind of strike me. And they talk about, you mentioned employee engagement earlier. And the companies on these Best Places lists have employee engagement in the 90% level. Mm-hmm. And then Peter Burke, who's been a guest here before, runs the Best Places, Best Companies group. They do these all over the country. Mm-hmm. Talks about the normal employee engagement levels are in the 40% range. Mm-hmm. What are some of the differences that allow a company to vault to those higher levels? And I think it gets back to, again, what we're talking about with that leadership that takes place. But what do you see as some of those key factors that help companies in that engagement area?
Mm-hmm. Well, culture for sure drives all of it, and culture comes from the top. So if I've got a dysfunctional senior leadership team, I can, without looking at their engagement data, I can tell you it's not going to be strong. So culture has to come from a top team and a top leader that leads in a way that is inspiring, that's fair, that makes the environment psychologically safe, that really wants to see people be empowered and are inspired to do good work, that they're fairly rewarded, that the workplace is as comfortable as it can be. All those things go into culture. But the most important piece for me around culture is that culture is just the compilation of the style of all of the leaders. So if your top leadership team has a strong ability to lead and they are a strong team, that will spill down to that next layer. Well, that next layer is looking up and going, well, what does it look like to be a successful leader here? And if they look up and they're seeing high quality leadership, they're gonna start to act that way. And that's how it goes down through the organization. So some of the things that I think can detract from culture is when an organization tolerates toxic leaders. So you might have someone that's very good at bringing in the money, but they're a complete jerk and they beat up their people emotionally, and if that's tolerated in that organization, then you've got a leader, a bunch of people who are beneath that love them and say, what's good leadership look like? Oh, it looks like being a great big fat jerk, right? And so they start emulating that. And so organizations that are unwilling to part with people who can't conduct themselves in a relatively civilized way, and people can get angry at work and people can have difficult conversations, all that's fine, but you can't be abusive to your people. And I see people that I would say are abusive to their people and are abusive to their peers, or they're dishonest with their peers, and they're allowed to continue to be there because they may have some technical skill that's quite valuable. But then if you're trading their technical competence over their ability to embody the correct kind of culture, that it's like a bad apple. Then you start creating more of those and more people that aspire to act like that. So to me, it's all around showing what good looks like at the top, modeling what good looks like, and then not being tolerant of poor leadership for the sake of something more convenient.
Has to check all the boxes. You got to get results and do it in the right way.
That's right. That's right.
And let's start off by mentioning, undoubtedly, a lot of people contacting you and your company, and you verified that. But how have their needs changed in recent years? Are companies coming looking for X today compared to maybe it was more of Y or Z a few years ago? How have some of those things evolved?
Yeah. Well, for us at least, and we're a fairly small firm, so don't put too much stock in the stats here. But I would say we used to do a lot more around team. I think now team tends to be something that we find that needs to be worked on. I don't think organizations are as proactively really focusing on that. I'd say in the past, primarily we would do executive assessment and coaching. So they think you're the right person for the role, but you're not a perfect fit. What are the performance gaps, and can those be closed through coaching? Some can, some can't. I would say in the last 5 years, executive onboarding has been huge. I think part of what's driving that, it's a part of why strategically I tried to hit that service line at the point that I did, was that the baby boomers are retiring so quickly, and that's such a huge generation. And then you've got Xers behind them, and we are such a tiny generation. So if you just think about all the senior executives that are retiring, you're leaving all this space, and the generation behind is too small to fill it. Well, so then you got to go down to millennials to get that pipeline to go up and fill all these roles. And so what you have is a country full of companies that have millennials retiring very, very quickly. There aren't enough Xers, so Xers are taking bigger and bigger roles earlier in their career before they've had as much experience or time to learn, or even just relative maturity than what the baby boomer would have, right? So the baby boomer's career is going to be sort of a slow and steady wins the race to the top. For Xers, it's very steep, it's very fast. So every year or two you might be in a new role because we're just pulling the younger generations up so quickly through the organizations. So you have people in roles with less experience. And then if you look at millennials, now that's a bigger population, but think about the age difference between a millennial and a boomer. Right? That they've got a lot to learn to start filling those big roles. I had my first CFO, she was in her late 20s, early 30s, because there's no one left to do that role, right? So because we know, and we've known for the past 15 years, that 40 to 50% of executives are going to fail when you put them in a new role. We know it costs twice as much as their salary. We've known this for 15 years. No one's doing much about it. And now that we have these generational cycles happening, it's just intensifying that. So I think organizations have to and need to put a bigger emphasis on onboarding, both at the executive level and all the way down. And they're starting to. And I think that's been, for our firm, that's been the source of the tremendous growth that we've had in the last 3 years.
And I'm sure it varies by situation, but can you give the listeners just at least a general time frame if a company's going to reach out and say, let's just say onboarding one executive, what the type of time frame that might be for you and your company to be involved to kind of make sure things are started in the right way?
Yeah, it's 6 months typically. So we like to be in there as quickly as possible, because, we've got to do interviews and create kind of a charter for that person. So I would love for that executive to have their charter handed to them within that first month or 6 weeks. Now they're going to be drinking from a fire hose. So sometimes even dealing with me is like, there's too much, right? It's just one more piece of noise. But the sooner they have that charter that really tells them this is what everyone expects of you. This is kind of the time horizon you've got to meet these expectations. This is how you can do this in a culturally acceptable way. That's pretty good information to have before you have too much much time to make a mistake. Because what we find is if they come in, they're there 6, and this is the other half of the phone calls I get. They've been enrolled 6, 8, 9, 12, 15 months, and they're not fitting in, and we think it's too late. They probably made a big mistake they shouldn't have made from a cultural perspective. They didn't spend enough time with stakeholders getting input on what they should be doing. They've broken some kind of sacred cultural norm, right? They've done something that they just can't recover from. Then they want us to come in and coach that person and fix it, which we can do, and we're almost always successful there too. But that would take more like a year to 18 months.
But significantly more challenging.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we coach them for 6 months in the beginning, do all that work up front, you're looking at a 6-month project. But if you come in and you're assessing the damage, okay, how bad is the damage? How wide is the damage? Is the damage fixable? Are people going to give you a shot? And then coaching them into how to fix all those problems and try to get to an optimal place, then you're looking at 12 or 18 months, and the success rate is high, but it's not as high as onboarding them the right way the first time. It's kind of like if you don't want wrinkles in your grocery bag, you can crinkle it up in a ball and take an iron to it, but you're still going to have wrinkles. But if you just, don't crinkle it up in the first place, you don't have to do anything.
There you go, an analogy to remember there. Okay, Emily, I said I promised when we started no questions out of left field, but this is the last question that we ask everybody this year, so it won't be too much of a surprise for people who've listened to our conversations. But think about whether it's your professional life, whether it's personal. Well, what does success mean to you is the question. Everyone always interested to hear what people's viewpoints are on that, and I don't give that to you in advance because I want to ask kind of that immediate response. So I stumble along for a little bit, give you a few seconds to think about it. But what does success mean to you?
That's a great question, and I'm sure the answer is different for everyone.
It is, yeah.
So success, I think people typically define it in financial terms, and I grew up very, very poor, so it's never occurred to me to try to make a ton of money. So that's not my focus, although I will say, our business has had some commercial success, and it's felt very good to be able to provide, for my family and to have a nice, safe place to live, and to not be afraid of, is college a possibility for me, right? So money for me is a part of it, but only because I'm a mom, and I want to feel that I've done a good job for my family. To me, though, I think success is, can you find a way to match your talents and your passions with something that you actually care about? So for me, when I was growing up, my dad worked for GE, and people have, I think, a lot of respect for GE leadership. My personal experience as a small child was, when your dad's the third shift machine shop operator, and he comes home and he, not having nice things to say about where he works and getting laid off all the time, creating all that economic uncertainty. For me, my passion is really trying to make organizations the kind of place where people can work and have sustainable income and have a reasonable environment that they can go home and not feel like they were just beat up all day, because all that stuff goes home to the family, right? So I think success is, so I'm very happy and I feel very successful because it just so happens that things, and I'm not good at a lot of things, but that the handful of things I'm really good at really can make a big difference in meeting that mission for me personally, and it leads to economic reward. So I think on top of that, I have the most fabulous husband on the planet, and so when you put those things together, are you happy at home? Do you feel like your gifts are being utilized? Does it feel like it's being utilized for a purpose beyond yourself? And are you rewarded? If there's anything better than that, I don't know what it is.
Well, Emily, I'm inspired by what you said in the middle of our conversation about when I asked about being uncomfortable, and just that determination to overcome any feelings of uncomfortableness. That's a great lesson, and that's success right there, defined and how that turns into helping the clients and everybody you work with.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I couldn't have done that, I'd still be a waitress at Shoney, and I was a really bad waitress, so it's all for the best.
Shoney's, classic from the past there. Emily Bermes, thanks so much for joining us. Best of luck with everything that you're doing, and really appreciate you sharing your insights with our audience on the In Chamber.
All right, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
Well, all right, this is our final episode of 2019. We will return on January 7th with our next conversation. Happy holidays to all. Look forward to speaking with you again on the next episode of the In Chamber.